Welcome back. Now let's talk about finding your next article. Where do you find inspiration? I know I find inspiration all over the place. Sometimes from my pet, sometimes from my children, sometimes from a walk in nature, sometimes from listening to an inspiring lecture, sometimes from sleeping. I'll wake up with a great idea, or driving sometimes helps. Where do you find your inspiration? Take a minute and write down two places where you tend to be inspired. They could be very specific places, such as in the shower, or very general places like in nature. So write down two places where you find inspiration. Hopefully, you were inspired to write something down. If not, keep thinking about it. It'll come to you. So let's look at some sources of inspiration, where places you can go to dig out your next journal article. A great place would be your dissertation. So if you've completed a dissertation, go back to that. Look at the recommendations section. Look at further research. Are there places you could go to find new ideas? I know for my dissertation work, I was done with it. By the time I got done, I didn't want to look at it again. It took some time before I could go back and see it with new eyes and new clarity to go, oh, here's some new directions I could go, some things I could look at. So give it some time, go back to it, and see what new inspirations you find. Poster sessions. A lot of times we do poster sessions at conferences about little projects, little ideas, little germs of things we're working on. And sometimes you can expand those into full-blown articles. So go back and look at some of the poster sessions you've done. Next, I'd say look at your teaching. For those of you that do teaching, you may find new ideas come up. Sometimes I get my best ideas while I'm talking, while I'm explaining something, while I'm thinking through something on my feet. You may have a number of ideas while teaching, or ideas that students have helped you formulate. Can you take those and put them into an article? Even an article on teaching. Colleagues, our conversation with colleagues oftentimes will spur debate and contention sometimes, maybe even agreement. But I think your colleagues can also inspire you to write and take new ideas in new directions. Next could be conferences. You attend a great workshop. You attend a fascinating lecture or concurrent session, and it inspires you to take your own step in that direction. Another place is through your reading. It could be just fiction or nonfiction reading that you're doing, or it could be academic reading. A lot of times I'll read a scholarly paper and go, wow, that's really interesting. I want to try that in my field, in my world, and see what that looks like. See if I can take these ideas and these thoughts and put a little spin on them, a little twist on them, a little bit of my own insight into them, and use those ideas in my own work. There's also your practice. So if you're a practitioner, let's say you're a physician and you see patients almost every day, you might get a great idea on how something could work, should work, or may work in clinical practice that you want to share, that you could turn into a scholarly paper. And then lastly, but certainly not least, are through emerging problems. Our world is full of issues and problems. From forest fires and weatherization to globalization and pandemics. Emerging problems are everywhere. And perhaps the latest problem could inspire you to write your next academic piece. Let's move on. Here's a quote from Albert Einstein, who hopefully needs no introduction. He says, the sign of true intelligence is not knowledge, but imagination. I think that's true. I think going back to this list of places where you can find inspiration, a lot of it is about creativity. How can we take what we do and coat that or layer that on top of an issue, on top of our dissertation, on top of a conversation, on top of our scholarship and teaching, on top of what we're reading? How can we be creative with what's around us to come up with our next great idea. So, how do you find your focus? A lot of times you may get overwhelmed with creativity. Sometimes I do. I am sometimes so inspired that I have hundreds of ideas, it seems like. Not really, but it seems like that. And I need to focus in. I need to hone my vision. So, what are some things that we can do, me included, to help us find our focus and track that one next article idea? So, these are some things that the science and the research tell us. Natural light's important, getting a lot of sleep, working less, really? Yeah. Working maybe more days a week, but less hours each day. Stop multitasking. I try to do everything at once. The research says you need to, this last point, try sprinting your mind. Instead of multitasking, do each task one at a time, but for a very short amount of time. Say yes and no to the right things. Stop perfectionism. It's good enough. So are you. Create time for reflection and exercise. Those are some things that the science and the research have told us. What are some tips and tricks that you can do? Things that you can do to help you find your focus. Listing things out. I like to make lists. It's always helpful to help me focus around an issue. Charting. Maybe a chart is more appropriate or a drawing is more appropriate. Free writing. This is when you just start down and with no intended agenda, you start writing out sentences about whatever it is you're thinking about or to kind of help jumpstart your writing. Looping is another activity. You get into the digging deeper activities in the workbook. You'll find free writing and looping are both there, as well as mind mapping, another great activity. Sharing your ideas with those around you. Sometimes that will help get you into a focus and help you find kind of what I would call a good rabbit hole. Sometimes people say rabbit holes and you kind of get lost in them. But a rabbit hole is much more confined than being out in the free field or the meadow or wherever it is. If you get into that rabbit hole, you can at least start focusing in on what you're doing. And then lastly, sometimes daydreaming is helpful. Just kick back and think about your ideas and let them toss and turn. And sometimes when your brain is free and it's not focusing so intently on trying to focus, it'll actually do the work you want it to do. So, another thing I'd like to pass on is keep a journal. This is something I do daily, is write in my journal, even if it's just a snippet. These are some of the health benefits that come from journal writing. This is what the research and the science have shown. I'm not going to go through and read them all to you because there's a lot of them and you can all read very well, I hope. But I think some of the most important things is that you're more mindful. It helps you organize. It sometimes will spark your creativity and it will improve your communication skills. I think all of those are true as well as everything else that's on this list. So I would challenge you, keep a journal, write things down, put everything in one place where you can easily find it and keep track of it. Date it so that you know when you did something and you can go back and find the idea that you had. You'll always have it with you. Okay, so mind mapping is the last piece we'll talk about. Pare down your words when you're mind mapping. These are just some strategies that I like to use. Use core phrases or ideas. Don't put too much text around it. Try to make connections between those words and phrases and ideas. And with the connections, try to make clusters. Pull them together. So go from connections to clusters. Then take some time away from it. When you come back, look for gaps. Are there things obvious and less obvious things that are missing? Try to be as objective as possible when you're reviewing it so that you can find those gaps and fill them. So, hopefully this was helpful in finding your next journal article. As always, if you have questions, concerns, or comments, please reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you.